Welcome back, everyone. How was your spring break?
It was fantastic. Coming back almost killed me.
Yeah, well, sometimes you the best part is to have a good spring break and to regret coming back because your spring break was so good, you just want to continue on it over and over again. So I'm gonna tell you a little story. Christmas break, I was preparing for this semester, and I think I told you at the beginning of the semester, this is my busiest semester at Truman. I've in my 10 years here. And going to be extremely busy while I'm there. Please don't try to make me do any planning or do any activities. I just need to focus on my work. And 2 days into my visit to Oklahoma, my mother got pneumonia, and she spent 3 days in the hospital. Now, I thought that was just an ironic twist. So, come spring break, because I was going to try to enjoy at least a little bit of spring break, but it was only for like 2 or 3 days. And so he gets here on Sunday, and you're probably seeing where this is going. All right. So I said, all right, I'm going to enjoy a little bit of spring break, but I'm going to work during spring break and get caught up on my stuff. All right. You're probably thinking, yeah, I bet his brother got sick. He says, no, my brother did not get sick. I got sick, like deathly ill, like lying in my bed, moaning about the end of the world type sick. So yeah, the way I just explained it to some of my students. I got up on Monday to try to type an email. I was out of breath after typing the email. Okay, now I know I'm out of shape, but I can at least type an email without actually exerting myself usually. So, yeah, I got better on Tuesday and Wednesday. I will say it was very fortunate. My brother's here. My brother's a personal chef, so he basically created the largest amount of chicken stock known to human man, and I was able to actually eat chicken noodle soup the entire time I was sick, which that's actually a really good benefit. So I was very lucky in that. But I've come to the conclusion that if I actually make the proclamation that I'm going to get a lot of work done over a period of time, that something's bad's going to happen. So I'm trying to actually move away from that. I'm going to try to make the proclamation I will never get any work done ever. All right, and see if that works for me. But it was a very unpleasant circumstance, and I guess I only have myself to blame for that. We are in the latter half of the semester, and the good news is, unless you're taking the final exam, which hopefully most of you are still trying to plan on not taking the final exam, unless you're planning to take the final exam, we are done with UML diagrams. So you can kind of do a little silent cheer and a little whoop, whatever. Unless you liked the UML diagrams, then I can always find more work. But my guess is most of you are done. The stuff we're going to be doing for the latter half of the semester, these next 5 chapters, is going to be more engaging. It's going to be a little bit more interesting. It's a lot more subjective. A lot of people, especially in business and accounting, they don't like subjective stuff, but it is a little bit more fascinating as far as the content goes. We will have to talk about the details and get down to the nitty-gritty, which is a lot less fun, but hopefully we'll layer that with some interesting discussion. Before we talk about today, though, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about in this course, data analytics. We're going to talk about that today. Before we get into that, I want to make sure that we are up to date on what expectations are for the remaining 6 weeks of the semester. I guess, 7 weeks, because 9 to 15, because we have to count 9 to 15. So 7 weeks of the semester. I want to give you just a quick update. So as you recall, I did push back our AI submission, which was going to be due originally, I think at the end of week 7 or week 8. I pushed that back because I was a little bit unhappy with how much research discussion we've had. This is actually due on March 31st now. I do want to clarify this because I'm a little bit concerned people are stressed out about this. First of all, I don't want anybody in this room to get stressed out about it, okay? I'm not saying I don't want you to work on it, but I want you to know this is very open-ended. I want you to do something that you find interesting and fun. An example of this, I started doing some research recently. I say, how can I put together better escape rooms? Because I'm a big fan of making escape rooms. I'm a big fan of doing escape rooms and a big fan of making escape rooms. And so I said, how can I use these a little bit more effectively as classroom lessons? All right. If you wanted to do something like that, that would be perfectly fine. There's no parameters on this where you have to do something boring. Says, well, I've got to talk about accounting information systems and how they're used in AI, and this is going to be tedious. This is not meant to be tedious. This is meant to be something that's personally interesting to you. So I want you to think about it from that perspective. We're going to have a couple more AI research discussion sessions. We're going to talk about AI tools and use of them. Hopefully that will be insightful. But do not come to this project thinking that it's going to be something very, very technical and very boring that you will never use. Actually, the whole goal of this project is to be something that you will use actively in your life and in your careers. So think about it from that perspective and how you could do something. If you are fascinated, how can I improve my video game speed running time using AI tools? I don't know if you're a speed runner, that might actually be relevant. I would like it to be relevant to you, but again, it does not need to be something that's constrained just to accounting and business. You can provide a very good justification for anything. I'm leaving this very open-ended deliberately because I want this to be something that's more interesting to you as opposed to be technical and focused on this course. So that's something I want you to bring to light. I do also want to mention, this is a ways away. We've actually got a little bit over a month before this is due. So about a month, we've got our next exam, which doesn't seem like it's that way, a long way away. It's a little over a month. Prior to the exam, you got professional interactions due. So if you attended the event, I think it was right before spring break, where they had the professional speakers talking about how to conduct an interview. If you attended that, which I know several of you did, that's great for a professional interaction. All you have to do is to provide a very brief write-up of it. The write-up is the criteria for the write-up is in the syllabus. Basically, it's one paragraph about what the presentation was about. Second paragraph, what you learned from it. That's it. Basically, one page double spaced, you're done. It's 10 points, very easy. If you've not done that already, there's actually an event tomorrow over in the Innovation Lab from 12 to 1:30 that you can think about. If that doesn't work, there's still opportunities coming up. But please make sure you start thinking about that if you've not done so already. Anything that is basically a professional interaction where you're developing your own professional network and learning something as a response is fine. I'm pretty open-ended on this as well. It does not even need to be restricted to business and accounting, though I would like it to be relevant to your careers, okay? So keep that in mind, and then that's going to be moving forward. The second part of the AI research project will be due shortly after the exam, which I know that that's kind of time constraints because you got the exam and the AI research project deliverable. But you should make some progress on that as we start moving forward with these discussions over the next few weeks. And yeah, then that's pretty much it. We're going to have kind of our go back to our standard routine. I know we had a little bit of disruption starting in week 7 because we had our exam, and then we had week 8 where we did some stuff that was non-routine. But we're back in the routine again, which, depending on how you feel about the routine, is either a good thing or a bad thing. Today we're going to talk about data analytics. So data analytics obviously have some very big relevance, especially in this day and age. And the way that I say data analytics is, depending on your perspective, you either think that they're good or they're evil. And there's definitely arguments for both of these, okay? There are definitely arguments for things for making that the data analytics can be a good thing. I think they have the potential to really expand our knowledge and expand our understanding of the way that businesses operate and the way that they work. That being said, there are certainly some problems with data analytics where they get used in bad scenarios. So I'm going to bring up this one right here. Has anybody heard of this company right here, Cambridge Analytica? It's a little bit of an old one. You may have encountered this one. So Cambridge Analytica is now a now defunct British research firm. And when I say research, I'm saying research, okay? They actually engaged with Facebook. They had a contract with Facebook to collect data via Facebook for research purposes. Now, there's going to be a couple of problems with this when we start talking about the nature of this. But first of all, what they really did with this data was not for research purposes. In fact, a lot of the criticism came with the fact that this occurred right around 2015. A lot of this data was used for purposes of influencing the presidential election that occurred at that time. In fact, a lot of people argued that President Trump won because of the influence of Cambridge Analytica, which, again, I'm not trying to make a judgment as politics, but that was one of the things that there was a lot of influence going into social media due to that. The real issue is not so much that, but what their Cambridge Analytica's data collection process is. So has anybody ever done like a data tool like social media where you've done a data collection where they say, we're going to collect information from you and you're going to volunteer and you have to authorize consent for this? Has anybody ever seen like that over a social media tool, something like that? So I know a lot of the current generation, they're not on Facebook. Okay, I use social media as a general purpose, but it was a lot more prominent back in 2015. One of the things that was really prominent back in 2015 were those Facebook quizzes. Has anybody ever seen those? Like where they were run by BuzzFeed or social media sites like that, and they were used specifically for the purposes of data mining. But you had to authorize consent to take those. In order to be able to take those, they would say, BuzzFeed is going to collect the information and they're going to store this and use it for their purposes. So they're very transparent about this. Cambridge Analytica had no transparency surrounding their process. They said, if you authorize this, we're going to collect data that's associated with your account. So what does that mean to you? That they're going to collect all the information on your Facebook account? They're going to collect demographic information like your name, your gender, your age, your location, things along those lines, right? Can we agree that that's probably the case? The problem with the transparency associated with this is an online quiz. It was called something like, this is your data life, or this is your data. I think what that was called, like, this is your data life. It did not just collect data associated with the accounts that were volunteering information. If you were a Facebook user and you volunteered to do this, your data life, it would collect the data for your account and then all of your friends on the Facebook network. So this is, did everybody see the problem with this? Okay, we talk about privacy rules. Usually there has to be consent with this. So if you had one friend on your Facebook feed that said, you know what, I want to do this your data life. It sounds like fun. You would be involuntarily opted into this. All right, regardless what you're going to be, what your impressions were. And so any friend or any connection that you actually have around that is going to be listed. So just for context, 270,000 Facebook users actually completed the "This is your data life" quiz. All right. Guess how many users were collected by Cambridge Analytica eventually because of 270,000 users? How much user information? So how many people think that it was greater than 50 million? It was greater than 50 million. It was 87 million users. So just by not having the proper consents in place, 87 million users, most of those involuntarily had their Facebook information shared, which is why there's a big criticism about around this. So certainly privacy and security concerns abound when we start talking about data. Now we're going to kind of allude into those and talk a little bit about that. But for the most part, we need to understand as data analysts, we need to be very, very aware of what the parameters and constraints are of our operations, what we're going to be doing, but how we actually have to take that into concern as well. Because the things that we can use to make very good decisions can also be used to make decisions that can be harmful if not used properly. That's just kind of overall constraint. We're going to talk about security and data parameters a little bit later in the course. Right now, we're going to talk about the data analysis process, and we're going to talk about how we get to that. So this actually emanates from this concept of big data. Has anybody ever heard that term before? Big data. Okay. So yeah, this is big data right there. Okay. Okay. I make that joke every semester. I never get a laugh, and that's fine because it's a really, really bad joke. I say that it's too corny by my standards, except I keep making the joke. All right. So I don't know what's going on here. I just have a really, really bad sense of humor. I'm trying to get an Iraq reaction. So here's the deal: is that if you remember this on the exam, you're going to say, "Man, that was a terrible joke," but you're going to remember it. Okay. So that's all that really matters. Actually, big data is voluminous amounts of data that are generated every day by people, and this probably goes without saying is that we in the information age, we generate data on a constant basis. Depending on who you talk to, this is actually going to be voluntary or involuntary. I do know a professor at another university who believes that every single device that we actually work with now is constantly collecting data. So this thing that you're carrying around right here, every word that you're saying is going to some repository and being collected, which I don't believe that's actually the case. I don't believe that anybody would actually want to collect the boring things that I say on a daily basis. And if they do, God help them, okay? Because some of the things I say are really, really tedious, as you all well know. But there is information that is being collected, whether I want it to be or not, because I carry around this thing and it can track where I'm going to be going. This is actually particularly profound to me. I recently bought a new car, and it actually has a heads-up display of my phone map on maps on my phone. So I've got an Apple iPhone X, and I know it's outdated, but it actually tracks where I go, and it can actually predict where my patterns are regularly. So I was looking at this on the map, and I started driving, and it automatically said 2 minutes to Truman State University. I'm like, crap, how did it know I was going there? So because I always go there every single weekday right around this time. And so this is the kind of data that they use to actually make prediction models. And it's fascinating. It's scary, but it's fascinating. So we actually have these data that are generated every day by people, and there are actually 5 features that can be characterized by data. Okay. Now I want to make a note of this, by the way. In the book, it actually calls this 4V. In this course, you're going to be responsible for 5 Vs. Okay. The 5th one is actually really important and really important and really profound, as we'll see in a little bit. Okay. So huge volume. Obviously, there's a lot of data out there, and being able to sift through it and sort through it and find out what's relevant, what's not, really, really important. Most of the data that's being generated, not useful for decision making, but there is going to be data out there that is very useful for decision making. If it can actually come to the decision, looking at my phone and what my activity is, looking at what the tracking is, it can make better decisions about what it is going to be at a certain point in time, providing me offers and providing me details based on my activity, knowing that I'm at Truman State usually from about 8:30 to 5 o'clock every single weekday. That's an easy one to actually identify the parameters, but sometimes it's relevant. Like if I decide to get up on the weekends and go to the grocery store and buy pineapple,
Is that going to be something that's a relevant point of data? Maybe, maybe not. So a lot of data, a lot of details that are being shared out there, but not necessarily all of it relevant. High velocity, okay? Velocity, you probably heard that term, talks about speed. Data is being constantly transmitted, and there's a lot of it that's going very, very quickly. That has to do with our technology age, is that we're all constantly connected to the internet and constantly to these networks that actually transfer this information. There is a huge variety of data that's available out there. As we're going to talk about a little bit later, we're going to talk about the nature of structured data versus unstructured data. Traditionally, we tend to think of data as being structured, stuff that we could put into a document or into a spreadsheet and say, this is stuff that we can analyze. And there's a lot of data of that format, but think about data that's unstructured as well. Can we say that audio files contain data? Yes, okay. Can we say images contain data? Yes. Can we put either of those into a spreadsheet? Not currently, or at least not very effectively, but it doesn't mean that there's no relevance or there's no value to that data. If we can find ways to change or transform that data into information that's meaningful, then we could actually glean some value that other traditional means cannot. Low veracity, okay? Has anybody heard that term veracity before? The only reason they're using the term veracity is because they wanted to stick with the letter V, but veracity means accuracy, all right? Data is very, very volatile in its nature, all right? It does not necessarily conform to specific parameters, and it's not always accurate. And now this is going to be a profound shock to many of you, but the information that flows on the internet out there, not all of it is true, okay? Not all of it's true, not all of it's factual. There's going to be information that you're going to encounter or data that you're going to encounter that is going to be inaccurate. In fact, we're going to, according to this point right here, most of it's inaccurate or inconsistent with one another. So we have to be able to sift through information and determine, even if we know that there's some truth to the data, it may not convey the whole picture, the whole scene, what we're looking for. This is particularly problematic in this day and age, is that we actually convey information that's got confirmation bias. Confirmation bias basically means that we want information that's consistent with our pre-existing beliefs. And so we go to websites and we go to news sources that are consistent with that. And so we see data that's also consistent with that. And then finally, we have high value. High value is probably go without saying, but this data can generate value, can generate details or generate monetary gains or even non-monetary gains that can be beneficial to an organization. This is something that's really, really interesting, because if we think about data, what if I ask you, is data an asset in an organization? From an accounting perspective, is it? How many of you remember from 220 a line item in your balance sheet that said data of the organization? Was that in the balance sheet? But we're trying to talk about it. If it has value, shouldn't it be an asset for an organization? This is a longstanding argument, is how do you actually value data? Because we can't actually derive a direct value from it. That's why we don't include it into the financial statements of value. But we do know that that data actually can generate some sort of benefit, some sort of monetary gain, some sort of non-monetary gain that is functional in an organization. So this is kind of a quandary, is that if it has value, then maybe it's something we should be able to define. And yet it's really, really subjective as to what that value is. But we do know that data has value, particularly if we can transform that data into useful information. Now, this is going to be an important point, by the way, because we talked about it already in this course. I'm going to reiterate the point. We talk about data. Data is kind of the raw transformed product. We're going to talk about information that is the transformed product. And I'm going to use my analogy that I use for everything, because you guys know I love food and I like to talk about it, okay? Data is going to be the cheese, the hamburger bun, the hamburger, the pickles, the mustard, all the ingredients that go into making the information, which is the cheeseburger, okay? Cheeseburger is the transformed product. That's the one that has value. Not that the data itself doesn't have value, but it doesn't have as much value when transformed into the final good. Also, I do want to clarify that I'm doing much better than I used to, but I will still occasionally interchangeably use data and information in this course. Please be very, very careful about that, because they are not the same thing, despite the fact that I will occasionally say that they are the same thing. I will do my best, and usually I'll catch myself that I didn't mean information, I meant data there, or vice versa. All right. So how much big potential does data analysis have? So what is the possibilities for data in this day and age? Well, a lot of organizations have started to understand that they are not commodities brokers, they are not services organizations, they are not manufacturing organizations. They are by and large organizations that are derived from data. In fact, we make an argument that, especially from most of the business lines that people in this room will go into, that they're going to be, their sole focus or their primary focus is going to be on data and transition to information.
and trying to benefit the use of that information. So that's kind of why what your value proposition is here, being at Truman State and being a business and accounting student, is that you're going to learn how to transform that data into information for gains for your organization. But technically speaking, big data could generate just up to $3 trillion in value per year, just as a subset of industries impacted, okay? Now, for context, global GDP is roughly 100 trillion annually. So 3% of all global GDP could eventually be housed in data generation and analysis, which that's a pretty profound amount. If you just basically said any industry had 3% of the GDP, that would be a massive industry. That would be a massive industry. I think data has a potential to overlap or overarch any other industry with respect to its ultimate value to organizations in the world. So in order for organizations to extract value from big data, they need to be able to transform it into something of use and value. And that's where we're going to be talking about data analytics. So we're going to start a discussion today. We're going to conclude our discussion next week, and we're actually going to be working with a data analysis tool. Some of you may actually have some exposure to it. How many people have used Power BI in a class or any previous courses? We're going to be doing it at a very basic level, but we're still going to we're going to look at how Power BI can actually be used in the data analytics task. Now, one of the great new pieces of news about being a student here at Truman is that you're going to get exposed to a lot of different data analytics programs. Power BI just being one of them. It's more of a visualization tool, but you have Excel skills. You're going to get exposed to Access. You may actually get exposed to specific big data analytics programs like Alteryx. So all of these are opportunities for you to actually learn about different ways of disseminating data. I will also throw in the statistical analysis tools, but for some reason, business and accounting students, whenever I say statistics analysis, they kind of shy away from that. They're kind of like, no, that's it. It's got the statisticians, the economists. Those are the ones who are going to be using that. We're gonna stick with Excel. Yeah. So yeah, don't be afraid of it. It's important to be able to analyze in a bunch of different ways. But data analytics is basically just the science of examining raw data, removing excess noise, and then organizing the data with the purpose of drawing conclusions for decision making, which sounds really, really cool when you get to the endpoint. Now, the endpoint can actually be a challenge to get there. That removing excess noise is actually a pretty big step. And when I say noise, I'm not talking about literal sound. I'm talking about anything that actually basically is convoluting the detail that you're trying to analyze. So easy way to think about it. Has anybody got like a water filter? Like I've got a Brita pitcher in my house that I actually pour the water from the city of Kirksville, which by the way, my roommate actually works for the city of Kirksville, the water. He kind of gets grumpy because I filter out the water and says, yeah, I'm just really, really spoiled about it. You know, this is the water, it's good, it's just by itself. But yeah, the Brita water filter, it filters out those pollutants and the things that you don't want to be drinking into the water that you do want to be drinking. That's kind of the same idea, is that we're going to extract anything that's not relevant to the analysis, and we're going to focus on the things that are relevant. We're going to remove that excess material. All right, so in general, we can actually talk about it 2 steps in the data analytics process. Now, this is going to be 2 general steps. You will need to know these steps, but we're going to get into a 4-step model here in just a second. The 4-step model is by far more important, but I do want to talk about this at a very basic understanding level about what it is that we're going to be doing. So the first basic primary step is going to be something called extract, transform, and load. The way that I like to describe this, and this is based on my history having worked in data analytics, I call this data cleaning and validation. So we want to extract the data. We want to actually obtain whatever data we need. We need to transform it, which involves cleaning the data and being able to put it into a format that can be useful, and then loading that into whatever our data analytics platform is going to be. Now, ETL is the process of cleaning and preparing the data for analysis. Here's the bad part, okay? If you don't like data cleaning, if you don't like ETL processing, you probably don't want to be a data analyst, because professionals estimate they spend between 50 to 90% of their time in this step right here. Having worked in ETL, having worked in data analytics, I will say ETL probably is on the higher end of that. The actual analysis itself is the fun part, but you're probably talking about on average, I would say on average, it's probably about 80% of the time is going to be cleaning. Simply because you do need that information to be, or the detail, I said I was going to use that information. You do need the detail to be useful. If it's not clean, if it's not formatted properly, if you don't have it structured correctly, you don't have everything lined up, it's useless to you. So this is the step that's probably the most important and prominent. it seems like the boring one, but I will say that there's rare few people who get out there and saying, well, this is kind of cool, seeing how everything comes together. I was one of those rare few people. So I do think this step is important, but it's important to note that this is a lot more prominent than people might think. They think this is probably the intermediate step, or this is a preliminary step. It actually is probably the most exhaustive of the two steps. I shouldn't say probably, it is definitely the most exhaustive of the two steps. The next step is obviously going to be process and analyze. This is where we dissect and study diverse business data to help organizations make sound and timely business decisions. Now, you're going to hear me talk a lot about my history as a data analyst. I worked in data analytics in KPMG. Basically, I worked in forensic data analysis, and we did audit support. We actually took populations of manual journal entries for organizations. We put them into our own proprietary data set tool, which is it was called K-Trace at the time, which is a combination of IDEA, which is a data analytics program, and then Excel on the back end for visualization. Which the reason why you're going to hear me say, why was Excel used for visualization? It's because we didn't have Tableau or Power BI back in 2005. We had Excel, which was the only tool that could actually create graphs from it. So when you hear visualization, I'm not saying Excel is a visualization tool. It's just it was the only visualization tool that really existed at the time. All right, so yeah, these are going to be our two basic category steps. We're going to have a much stronger framework here in just a second, and we'll talk about that. But let's go ahead and just dive into why data analytics can be important. Let's talk about both a business perspective and an accounting perspective. So data analytics can enable businesses to identify future opportunities or risks. All right, if we see trends that are happening, we see things that are happening over time, or if we see things in the environment that might affect what our operations are, then we can address those properly. They can also affect internal processes, improving productivity, utilization, and growth. From an accounting perspective, we tend to operate from the assumption that things are kind of compartmentalized to an organizational level because of the financial statements and the preparation of those. That tends to be a big focus, especially when we talk about how they feature with other disciplines, particularly with finance and economic disciplines, looking at the big picture. But keep in mind, organizations are comprised of much smaller components, and understanding the nature of those components and how they operate can be really, really beneficial to many organizations. We did a lot of analysis of payroll and procurement when I was working in data analytics, and these are subsets of the bigger whole, but they were still really important to understand what's happening here and why. What details do I need to understand why they're important. For an accounting impact and financial accounting, data analytics can be used to scan the environment to identify potential risks and opportunities to the firm. This is kind of similar to what we talked about before, understanding what it is in the environment that's going to be a threat or an opportunity for us and be able to address that properly. It can also reduce the time auditors must spend on gathering evidence, allowing them to focus much more on professional judgment evaluating risks, such as fraud. I will tell you right now that if you go back 20, 30 years and look at accounting and auditing back in that time period, there was a lot more focus on the numeric aspects, the quantitative aspects. When we actually incorporate data analytics into these tasks, then basically auditors don't have to do the quantitative analysis. They can focus more on the qualitative questions, asking more subjective details and trying to understand the bigger picture. And I will say that's far more interesting and engaging than trying to actually do journal entries or doing T accounts. Remember those T accounts and journal entries that I made you go do during spring break? I'm hoping that after a week you guys have forgiven me, but yeah, that's not what you want to be doing in the real world, whether you're in business or accounting. What you want to be doing is asking more questions about the big picture. All right, so let's go ahead and get into our model that we're going to be utilizing for the next two chapters, okay? This is a model that's used by the case author, Vern Richardson. He calls this the AMPS model. And this is the wrong type of AMP. This is not the AMP we're talking about here, but this is still pretty cool, I think. Yeah, so the AMPS model actually has 4 steps in our data analysis process, all right? The first step is going to be ask the question. Second step is master the data. Third is perform the analysis. And the fourth is share the story. Now, the question always comes up, is this going to be on the exam? The answer is 100% yes. Not just that you know the 4 steps, but you understand what each step represents, okay? This is a linchpin of this particular chapter. This is probably the linchpin of the chapter. This is absolutely something you should know. All 4 steps and what they represent. The good news is we're going to talk about all 4 steps, and we're going to use practical examples both in Excel and Power BI to illustrate these 4 steps. So the next 2 weeks of Excel assignments, we're going to be doing data analytics tasks, and we're going to be showing how each of the 4 steps are applied in our data analytics process. So what are we going to be doing for these processes? Well, first of all, ask the question. Oh, okay. So I forgot. I had a picture behind the AMP. It's this picture right here, which is a far more relevant AMP process model. All right, let's get into the AMP process. So first of all, ask the question. So the AMPS model starts with asking questions that can be addressed with data. It's important to note that your data is going to be constrained by what detail you can derive from it, what information can be derived from it. So in order to be able to understand the value of the data, you need to understand what types of questions can we look at. There are certain things that I've done in research that I've like to ask questions that say, all right, I would like to know about auditor quality within a certain realm of subset of industries. That would be an example of a research question that I might ask for personal and research. Then I try to find data sets that associate with that, and I can't find any data that actually answers that question. So the first thing we have to know is, what are our data limitations? What are our constraints? What types of questions can we ask? We're going to be talking about these terms called queries. Has anybody heard the term query before? Okay. A query is just simply a question that you ask of your data. When you hear me say the word query, I'm saying we're querying the data. We're just simply asking a question of data. But in order to be able to do that, it has to be a question the data can answer. So we're going to be looking at our data. We're going to be looking at the data set and saying, all right, what things is this data telling me? So some examples of this. What is the most profitable store at a store? What is the most profitable stores in Missouri? So example of, imagine you're working for Walmart and you have regional data information for these for the Midwest, and you look at the state of Missouri and look at Walmart and you say, okay, let me look at Walmart. Wow, this is interesting. Spike in cheeseburger consumption in Missouri, particularly in the city of Kirksville. That's weird, you know? Yeah. So yeah, that would be an example of a question that you'd ask of a specific data set. Another example, why are costs increasing in the West but decreasing in the East? And so, yeah, there's probably a snarky answer to that one too, but that would actually be a good demographic information question, assuming you could disseminate that information into West and East geography. What is the probability that our audit client will go bankrupt or need to restate its financial statements? This is actually a really interesting one. We can use large scale data for this particular question. In fact, we're going to do a bankruptcy analysis. I believe we're doing that next week. We're actually going to do a high level bankruptcy analysis as one of our Excel assignments. So yeah, whatever the data can tell us here. Next step is going to be master the data. And I want you to write down to this, make sure you note this. This is where our primary ETL step takes place. So remember we talked about extract, transform, and load. Mastering the data is that data cleaning and validation step where we actually prepare the data for the next step, okay? So it's basically the preparation step. So identify which data are suitable for answering questions. The questions can include, so data accessibility, can we get the needed data to answer the question posted? So once we identify the data, we say, all right, does this data suit our purposes and suit our needs? If not, maybe we need to request different data. Secondly, data reliability, is the data clean? This is a really, really interesting question. It sounds it doesn't sound like a really important one, but once you get into the real world, you find out this is a really big one. Because I give you data sets already in Excel, already formatted, already relevant. Do you think that's the way it works in the real world? That you're going to have clients that you're going to be working with or bosses you work with, and you say, I need this particular item, and they're going to send you a cleanly formatted Excel spreadsheet with columns all set up and all nice and neat and orderly in perfect font and perfect working order? It would be great if that was the way it worked in the real world. It would cause a lot less stress, but unfortunately, that's not the way the world really works, okay? Data integrity, is the data accurate, valid, and consistent over time? What did we say about that word veracity? Does everybody remember that word veracity we talked about with big data? What did veracity mean again? Accuracy. What did we say with respect to accuracy on data? It is low, okay? Which is why this reliability point is really, really important, because we need to make sure the data itself is reliable, it's valid, and we see a constant trend over time. If we see a lot of fluctuation or volatility, we may have an indication that the data itself is not relevant. Then the data type, is the data structured? Hopefully, yes, okay? Is it internal? Are there privacy concerns with the data? Can we even use the data? Is this information, or I told you I would do it. Is this detail that we should not be utilizing for some internal purposes or proprietary uses? Are we taking advantage of some sort of data set that should not be externally disclosed? So I want to talk about something that's going to be, it's talked about in the book, and it's very, very relevant, okay? I want you to consider the following issue. Let's say that I'm going to give you a choice of how you're going to receive a data set. Okay, I could give it to you in Excel tables, or I can give it to you in a PDF file. Which would you naturally choose as a being of high relevant relative intelligence? I'm gonna say Excel file. Yeah, Excel file. Why? Because it's easily formatable and easy to read. Has anybody ever tried to extract data from a PDF file? All right, so if you really want an exercise in frustration, okay, go to a PDF file, one with like a table, like a 10K report from like SEC. Try exporting that information into Excel and see how successful you are. PDFs are notoriously stingy about being readable, and yet I cannot count on. I can't count on. I probably couldn't count on a dozen hands, but I definitely can't count on two hands the number of times I had a client. I said, "Please send this data to us in a readable file," and they sent it to me in a PDF. All right. I actually did have a tool that could read PDFs, but it was a really, really time-consuming task. And I said, "Could you just send us a text file or an Excel file?" They said, "Nope, PDF is the best we got." Why is this so important? Because if we can't read the data, we can't use the data. It doesn't matter if it's there. How many people want to go through a million lines of data and hand input that data? If you are, you're in the wrong business, because that's not what I'm trying to teach you in this class. I'm not trying to teach you how to hand input data. Hopefully nobody raised their hand and said, "That sounds like a good time to me, Dr. Barnes." Hopefully everybody's like, "Man, data input sounds like the most miserable thing in the world." And it is. That's why we're trying to avoid that, okay? So one thing that we need to know is we need to have standards for the data that we're going to receive. For external audit, which is going to be very relevant to several of you in the future, okay, external audit data standards actually provide criteria for data files and fields to support business processes and external audits. So it's not just relevant just to external audits, but also general business processes of organization as well. These are going to be insisted upon by the external auditor. So the external auditor comes in and says, when you extract your data, you're going to either extract it in a text file with pipe delimiters. Does anybody know when I say the word pipe or I say the word delimiter, what either of those mean? Okay, so for the word pipe, I want you to look at your keyboard and look right above the enter key, and you're going to see a symbol first of all, you'll see the backward slash, but above that, you're going to see two dots, one or slashes right above one another. Okay, that is the pipe symbol. Okay, it is very, very rarely used in common communications, which is why it's used as a delimiter very frequently for transmission of data. When I say delimiter, does anybody know what that means? Have you heard that term? So a delimiter is a way of noticing changing in fields for a particular row. So if I want to say, all right, last name, Barnes, then you see a pipe symbol that says that's the end of that particular field. It's going into the next field, which is Michael, which is first name. So we can separate out field inputs in a text file by using a delimiter. And when I say pipe delimited, that is the symbol that we use to notate the change. Now, you probably have seen a more reasonable delimited file. I personally operate almost exclusively on pipe delimited whenever I do data analysis. But you've probably seen one that's a little bit more reasonable. I say reasonable as it's more frequently used. Comma separated values files, CSV files. Those are basically the same things. Those are delimited, but they use commas. What's the problem with using a comma as a delimiter versus using a pipe as a delimiter? So commas, do those get used very frequently in general general vernacular or general communication? Does anybody use commas in their communications? Like Dr. Barnes, I've sworn off commas. I use them never in my text messages or emails. If people want commas, they're going to have to demand them from me. Okay. Obviously, everybody is going to be saying I'm being facetious, but for the most part, people in this room are going to use commas. So they're probably problematic to use as delimiters simply because you don't know if it is a communications tool or if it's a delimiter tool. That's why pipes are so important, because pipes can actually be used as a delimiter without the worry that they're being used for something else. Anyway, that's just an example of kind of the audit data standards. Is that I would, if I were an auditor, still an auditor, I would say I wanted to file being communicated to me in a pipe delimited format because I know pipes are not going to be used as a tool for anything else. All right, next we got performing the analysis. All right. Third step is to try to determine what type of analysis should be performed. We're going to talk about 4 types of analysis in this course. So we're going to start with the simple, and we're going to move to the more subjective, all right? So descriptive analysis. This is just simply a question of what happened. We look at historical data, and we try to make a determination of what happened with the data. This is a very, very simple question. This is the type of question that you've been doing in accounting and business for a long period of time. You've been looking at historical information and trying to determine what the information tells us. The next one is a step up. It sounds very similar, but this is called diagnostic analysis. And this is saying, why did it happen? All right. So if I were to say variance analysis, everybody remember from 221, or if you've taken cost accounting with Dr. Otero, You caught those variance analysis. I know sometimes people say like, Dr. Barnes, stop that. And you don't want to talk about that because variance analysis is one of those things that strikes very certain feelings in people about that. But when we talk about variance analysis has two aspects. First of all, what are the variances? Okay, that would be what happens. That would be an example of descriptive analysis. Is that sufficient to know what the variances are when you're doing this in 221? Does your 221 instructor say, all right, calculate the variances and then we're done? Say $1 million unfavorable. Well, first of all, you'd have to say, what does unfavorable even mean in this context? You want to actually interpret why that variance occurred or what the variance means, and then you want to understand why did it happen. So if it's a materials variance, you would say, all right, it appears that we paid too much for materials. Why did we pay too much for these materials? That would be an example of a diagnostic analysis. That would where we say, not only we do not really want to know what happened, we would like to know what are the underlying reasons for this occurrence taking place. Then moving forward, we've got, so those are the two that start with D. Those are kind of the current period analysis. Then we got the future analysis. These start with P, okay? Predictive analysis. What will happen in the future? So we know what has happened in the current period. We can use this to predict what we think will happen in the future, whether that be the next period or the periods moving forward. An example of like trend analysis. Remember that from your finance classes where you see a trend and you see, okay, gross profit has been consistently 30% over a period of time. If I predict that my sales revenue is going to be $1 million, then I can predict that my gross profit will be $300,000 because it's 30%. It's a very easy predictive analysis. We've got certainly more complex and more powerful predictive analysis tools. Remember those statistical analysis tools I was talking about before? Doing an OLS regression and be able to actually predict on based multiple variables about what a future value would be. That would be an example of a predictive analysis that's much more powerful for data analysis purposes. And then finally, we have prescriptive analysis. Prescriptive analysis is saying, we know what we think will happen in the future. What should we do? How should we address it? Okay. So we think that costs are going to increase in the future based on trends. How do we address increasing costs? Do we need to increase price? Okay. Do we need to reduce costs in other areas? Do we need to accept that we're going to have a lower margin? What is going to be our solution to these particular problems? These are all questions that we can ask with respect to the analysis and come up with something of relative value. All right, so that's our third step. We got fourth step, okay, which is going to be sharing the story. So the final step is how to present the findings. We're going to expand on this in chapter 11. So if you are really excited for me to finish AMPS, I'm sorry. We've got another week before we do that. This is going to be to be continued, okay? This is what we're going to talk about all as far as our focus for chapter 11. But I do have one more thing I want to talk about, okay? I do want to talk about cost considerations. So going back to what we talked about in the previous part of the semester, the first part of the semester, is cost important to accounting information systems? Yes, remember SFAC number 8, and I said cost has to be less than what? The cost of accounting information has to be less than its benefits, okay? The benefit of providing that information, okay? That has to be true for accounting information of all types. So this data analysis, we do have to consider the cost of obtaining this information or this detail and with the cost of the data, all right? So what are some costs associated with this? Well, first of all are going to be the personnel. These are the employees with the skills to prepare and analyze the data. And they're not cheap. I will tell you right now, I don't think any of you should go out of Truman State and go look for a job and basically say, I will accept minimum wage. Unless minimum wage goes way up, I think everybody in this room is going to be much more valuable than a minimum wage. Your skill set are going to demand a much higher wage, and that's going to be true for the organizations. They may say, all right, well, this is a Truman State student. Well, they're really high cost, but they're also very high benefit. That's hopefully the impression and interpretation that you get when you leave here. But we do have to accept this is going to be a high cost associated with that because this is a high value proposition. Next is going to be the storage, okay? This is something we've kind of jumped around, but the storage of data requires massive storage platforms. Now, the good news is in this day and age, we actually have a way of kind of deferring these costs. You probably have heard of the term the cloud, okay? Not the clouds outside, but the cloud out there. The cloud is a shared platform for storage, which is usually an offsite platform. This can actually defer a lot of costs. There are some other costs associated with data storage. So the direct cost would actually be the monetary cost. Cloud storage is usually a much lower monetary cost than on-site storage. Are there non-monetary costs associated with cloud storage?
For example, if I say the cost of security and the cost of privacy, is that a non-monetary cost but still relevant? Yeah, if you store something on the cloud, that means you're giving it more exposure to other parties to actually access that information or that detail, okay? But that might be a cost that's relevant and something that we'd actually be willing to incur to actually reduce the monetary cost. This is a whole other area of discussion, but it's something we have to consider. We have to consider that if we're going to be using cloud storage, we open up a whole new series of concerns. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we move forward in the semester. Then finally, we have processing. The cost of technology and processing power required to perform data analysis can be enormous, okay? Can be enormous. And we're going to be doing some AI query, and I do think it's important to be able doing some AI queries because we're going to need to upgrade our technology capability in that area. That being said, this is a very, very illustrative example, easy to absorb example. So if you run one AI query in ChatGPT 4.0, it would actually, the amount of energy that's used to run in that with the data processing center is equivalent to keeping a 40-watt light bulb on for 1 hour, which doesn't seem like a lot, and it's not a lot if you're doing it one time. How many people have just run one query in an AI tool and said, yeah, I'm good. You know, I don't think I need to do this ever again. Has anybody in this room been like that yet? So, hopefully not, because I'm actually giving you assignments to run AI queries. But usually when you run AI queries, how many you're running? Dozens? Hundreds? Thinking about that, imagine keeping a 40-watt light bulb out in your apartment and just leaving that on for hundreds of hours at a time. It's like, Dr. Barnes, I'm a college, my utility bills are already too much. Yeah, I'm forcing that on you. That's something very, very big concern, and those costs are going to be passed on to the consumers of that information that's generated. All right, so we actually have to be not only considerate of the costs that are going to be passed on, but there's also the non-monetary cost, or technically non-monetary cost. We can talk about the impact on the environment and the planet itself with associated with that. So there's a lot of considerations to associate with this, and something we have to be very, very cognizant of. There is always going to be a cost for this type of analysis. Now, is the benefit worth it? We'd like to think so, but in some areas, we may have to actually back off and say, I don't know that the juice is worth the squeeze in this particular situation. That's what our conclusion may be in some scenarios. All right, that does it for today. We will get back to NetSuite on Wednesday. See you all then.